Esse é o painel Music Tech Festival, Tecnologia para o Futuro da Música. Ele será todo em inglês, então se vocês precisarem de tradução simultânea, tem os fones lá atrás, tá? E o canal para vocês será o 3. Vou passar agora para o Andrew, ele fará todo o direcionamento. Bem-vindo.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start a timer so that I don't talk for too long before we start taking some questions. So let me just do that. Okay, that's good. Hello, thank you so much for coming to this, because this is one of those things where by looking at the program you're not exactly sure what it is you're going to get when you get here. So there'll be a bit of explanation about who we are, what we do, where that comes from, and why we're sitting in SãO Paulo at SEAM talking about it. So I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm Andrew Dubber. I'm the director of something called Music Tech Fest. And Music Tech Fest is what we call both the festival of music ideas and a giant creative laboratory. And that part of it will become more clear as we go along. We're going to play some slides in the background that will just kind of rotate through, so you'll get a sense of how that feels. And Cairo is going to press the button now. Okay. Cairo, we're good to go. We're going to have a little slideshow that will run as we go through this. Now, just to give you a little bit of background about me, I went to Music Tech Fest the second time it happened. So I'm not the founder of Music Tech Fest. I just went to it as somebody who would be involved in it and never went home. And so now I'm the director of the festival. This is Mechela Magas. She is the founder of Music Tech Fest. And it's probably a good moment for you to explain what it was you thought you were starting when you started it, and where that comes from.
Hi everyone. It's fantastic to be back in Brazil. I've become a regular here as well now. And Andrew dragged me here first time, and it was fantastic. So, and I must say that we have already been Brazilified, because we turned up in black and white, and the first thing that people at SIM did was just put lots of like pink and blue and yellow, and so this is already feeling a great deal better now. So yeah, I started Music Tech Fest in 2012. I was at that time directing a project with some big professors in the field of music technology or music information retrieval. That sounds like a bit of a kind of a mouthful, but it's all the stuff that drives all the new systems that you probably now know and use, like the Deezers and Spotifys of this world, and Shazam, and I don't know how many of these kinds of things you're aware of. And I started working on this. I was consulting to people like iTunes. Half of my company ended up at Apple, and the design of the first iPhone is still there. And I was consulting to iTunes on new kinds of ways that you could search for music, on new ways in which you could promote music, which I thought was terribly, terribly boring and static. And I thought it was amazing that we had gone from having wonderful, beautiful, printed artwork that was promoting music to, in the digital space, going to Excel spreadsheets, basically, that looked like sort of something you would use for accountancy and finance. So basically, there were already at that time lots of ideas of what could be done there, and I knew it was possible. And I was also consulting to Peter Gabriel, for those of you who are familiar with the artist. He's been really investing in the digital space and in innovating in that area. And then, of course, that interaction also informed me about what was possible. So basically, I wanted to unite people who were really forward-thinking in terms of technology, people who were developing really cool systems, but they were in like little groups in research centers spread across the world. There is a community called there's an International Society for Music Information Retrieval. Again, a mouthful. No, I sympathize with the translators, they're probably struggling with this. But it's basically a society that was looking at how data and extracting features from music and descriptors of music can drive systems for various different things you could do with music, both in terms of search and in terms of generating new kinds of music. And this was a group of people, international community of about 300 researchers and basically geniuses who've probably been responsible for most of the sort of these new systems that you see now, because most of the PhDs, most of the people who were on doing doctorates in this area went on to work for all the Pandora and Grace Note and whatever else. So my feeling was, what is missing is the artists and the music industry, because the music industry was operating in the old-fashioned way. Well, you all know this story, I'm sure by now. And it was very important that we brought the music industry together with these guys who were advancing things on the tech side, and that some really, really great things would be possible. Except, of course, what happened was that they said, the guys from academia said, no way, we're not talking to those guys. They're impossible to talk to. We don't know, they don't know what we're talking about, we don't know what they're talking about, they operate in a completely different way, we're not going there, we're not talking to them. I'm like, oops, this is kind of not an easy one. And also I said, why don't we unite artists and scientists, like the computer scientists in the same space, and the computer scientists, and I am also one, because I did my PhD also in that field, so I am allowed to say that we can be a little bit autistic, for no better word, but a bit antisocial and a bit kind of difficult to talk to sometimes. So basically, for musicians and artists to talk to the computer guys, it was again one of those kind of no, just don't go there. But I have got a great deal of experience of working across these kinds of fields. My background is in the arts. In Brazilian terms, I could be defined a cultural producer. Which I absolutely love, by the way. I discovered how people define themselves here. And in that sense, I have a lot of experience in uniting these very, very different people in the same space. And I gave it a go, basically. I thought, well, you know, if it's a little workshop, and maybe a couple of little workshops, we've done something. Well, right from the beginning, I mean, I campaigned around all the big guys, BBC and EMI and Shazam and Spotify and all these guys, and all jumped on it. From the beginning, we ended up with a 3-day festival with hundreds of people. And it ended up being us, whoops, how are we going to fund this? How are we going to support it? But basically, it just ran off from the beginning, because there were so many people who were coming out of all kinds of backgrounds, and people were like doing stuff in their bedrooms, like soldering and making new kinds of instruments, or experimenting with music in completely new ways, and they all had kind of crazy ideas, and it was just phenomenal right from the beginning.
So I went to the second one of these, and what led me there was, prior to being involved in Music Tech Fest, my job was Professor of Music Industry Innovation at a place called Birmingham City University in the UK. And that came from my history was, I was in radio for a long time, I ran a record label, I was a record producer, and of course that's not the greatest get-rich-quick scheme in the world. So in order to pay the bills, I did some teaching, and then I got interested in the academic side of things. Long story short, I ended up in the UK from New Zealand, and was this, I was basically interested in the intersection of independent music, particularly, because I like to help the little guys. I was interested in the internet and innovation in that space, so I ended up writing a blog for a long time called New Music Strategies, and that was about how independent artists and independent record labels and promoters and so on could use this incredible tool rather than kind of treat it as a threat. And that was my starting point. I ended up being a professor of music industry innovation, but innovation came to mean different things to me over time. And I got really interested in this idea of social innovation, the idea of how you can make things better, and particularly how you can make things better through music. And I got involved almost immediately when it started with an outfit called Unconvention. And Unconvention was originally about this many people in a church hall in Salford, near Manchester in the UK. And we were just talking about how can the independent music sector be viable, sustainable, how can we use new tools and technologies, what else can we do to make this work? And that kind of spiraled from there. And so Unconvention traveled, and it went to India, and it went to Colombia, and it went to Brazil. We went to Goiânia first, I believe, and we were in SÃO PAULO, and so we went to some different places around the world. And everywhere I went, I found these incredible projects where people were using music as a way to address something else entirely. And the reason that it worked was that everybody loves music. Music is something that brings everybody together. And so I was really excited by this idea that you could do good through music. And one of the projects that I got very, very interested in was something that was happening here in Brazil called Furtado, which I'm sure a lot of you will be very familiar with. This kind of network of independent music collectives. And on paper, this very unproblematic idea of there is a group of people who want to do cool things like play gigs and put on festivals and so on, and Brazil is huge. And how do you deal with that? So about joining the dots together, making it possible for people to go from place to place. And then it revealed itself to be kind of more interesting than that, and also more complex. But there were things like they had created their own currency. It's like, that's something I had not heard of before. So I became really interested in this idea of the solidarity economy that like everybody would know and understand in Brazil, and nobody in the UK had ever heard of, let alone thought about. And what I wanted to do was take some of those ideas back and go, look, what these guys are doing here is really interesting. The independent music sector in Brazil, they've basically created their own economy. They've created their own, way of doing things. Let's tell that story. So I told the story a number of times to a number of different people, and one of them happened to be a film director from a production company. Said, well, let's make that as a documentary. And around this time, I came to Music Tech Fest, and I said, let me tell you about music technology and music innovation in a way that isn't just about let's make apps that are about making bands famous. Let's put technology and music together and try and innovate in a way that makes A, music better, and B, the world better. And I think those are good things to work towards. Now, of course, none of these things are ever simple, and as some of you may know, there's this kind of, this is not a simple story to tell when you start talking about Furtado, and that is a long story that will ultimately kind of reveal itself if this documentary ever gets finished. But the crux of it was, I went to Music Tech Fest to talk about this, and I found my tribe. And why I found my tribe is here are lots of people who are going, what else can music be? What else can we do? And oh my God, I thought it was just me. And it was hundreds of people who'd come together and found each other because they were doing really interesting things that pretty much nobody else had thought of in the space that connects music and technology. And so, like I say, I went and I stayed. And within about 3 weeks, I think, I'd said to Mechela, let's go to Brazil, we're making a documentary.
That was quite a story actually, because he brought me over to Brazil, and the guys from Furtado at that time were actually doing Media Ninja, and they were doing all this, I don't know how many of you have probably been following all the mess that was kind of out in all the papers, and even in the UK. First thing that happened at Guarulhos was we were bundled into a blackened car, and the guys went, "Welcome to the revolution!"
You're just in time, we're having a revolution. Like, no, I thought I came here to make a documentary about music.
It was just
However,
like, what the?
But this idea of Music Tech Fest being something that is about, there are a number of things. One is, it's about people who go, what else can music be? How else can it operate? How can it help? And let's just kind of put the sciences and the arts, let's put all of human knowledge together, let's put all of human activity together and kind of explore the boundaries. So Music Tech Fest, and the thing I really loved about it when I got there, is it's not a festival of concerts. Because there are thousands of those. You don't need another one of those. And it's not a conference. It's not like this. It's not panel sessions. It's not PowerPoint presentations. It's, you get some really interesting people together, you put them in a room and they invent things. And then they get on the stage and they perform with them. And they talk about their research, or they talk about the things that they've invented, but they showcase, and they and you get musical performances. So you get lots of really well-known artists at Music Tech Fest, but nobody goes there to play their set, which I think is really, really interesting. So it's something that it travels, because nobody else is doing something like this. And so every time we talked about it, people said, can you come and do it here? And so, Music Tech Fest, there were 3 in London.
Yeah, the 3, well, we did 2 in London before we toured, but basically, Music Tech has been in London 3 times, Berlin twice, we were at the Centre in Paris, we were in Nerd Labs, Microsoft hosted us in Boston with all the MIT and Harvard and that crowd, and then they got together completely spontaneously and wrote a manifesto for this. So some of the kind of PhDs and academics, and some really unbelievable academics from those circles, are undersigned, well, not undersigned, they're the authors of our manifesto, which claimed that what we were doing was actually not just relevant for music or technology, but actually for all fields of research. And that kind of put us on a spot a little, because we had suddenly hundreds of people undersign this manifesto, and we had to actually, well, not had to, but I mean, I felt I had a challenge. I had to show that what we were doing was actually relevant to all other fields, and I felt the same, but one thing is saying it and making a big claim, quite another thing is doing it. And what you will find very quickly if you get involved with Music Tech Fest is everything is hands-on and everything is about prototyping ideas. So if you have a new idea about how things should be run, and I don't mean just in how you make music, but how things should be run, we prototype them, we make them. So basically, I mean, you were asking about where it was. We had Scandinavia, we had Central Europe, we had Wellington in New Zealand. There, all the Maori and Polynesian artists brought their huge carved wooden instruments. And when they saw that we hacked into an Australian didgeridoo and we blocked it on one side with a speaker and basically beamed music from an iPad, electronic music, into the didgeridoo, and it was double amplified inside a didgeridoo and then beatboxed on the other end with it, and they were just like hooked. They were bringing us this national heritage instruments all fully carved and everything, saying, "Can you hack into this?"
It was essentially a dubstep specific instrument hollowed out by termites, which was quite a cool concept, I thought. So we did travel it around, but the thing that happened in Boston was kind of, I think, sort of one of the things that I brought to Music Tech Fest. Was this idea that this, because when I got to Music Tech Fest, there were three main strands. There was the stage, where people were kind of showcasing their inventions. There was the hackathon.
That's right.
Where people were inventing new things.
And the workshop, which was on synesthesia or crazy stuff where you can kind of turn color into sound and sort of be really, really creative with it.
Right, so when we started moving it around, what we added to that was what we call the academic symposium, or the research symposium. And I said symposium rather than conference again because a symposium, by definition, in fact if you go to the original Greek definition, it involves lots of beer. But it's essentially a group of people talking about something they're interested in. And so rather than being a bunch of academics coming together and saying, here is my research and here is my completed paper, it's academics coming together and go, I'm really interested in this thing. Do you know about this thing? Can we do a project on it together? And partly through that, Music Tech Fest became, and also partly because of how it's sort of the kind of people that it brought together, it became about people starting things there that go on to have a life beyond it. So Music Tech Fest became very, very quickly a sort of a petri dish of experimentation that things could grow out of and have a life of their own, which I thought was really interesting. But it's that the manifesto grew out of was the academic symposium that we did at Microsoft Research.
Yeah, I mean, it came out of academia in the first place, because we know all the people that ran the original roadmap were all the professors in the field and stuff, but also because I had one foot in industry and one foot in there, it came together. But the main thing about it was that, and I think maybe, I'm not sure if it's clear from what you just said, that the people who then end up working together are people who they've never worked together before. And this is the magic of it. This is what's become totally, like, it's one of those things that people ask you to explain afterwards, and you go, well, you know, I could tell you kind of all the bits that I've put together, and it is, in a way, curated, because I always believe in great brains in the room, and that could be the great beatboxer over here, and the guy who's really brilliant at guitar pedals over here, and then the guy who does neuroscience, and the guy who does, I don't know, accessibility applications for disabled musicians. And you put them all together, but because I know the kind of people they are all super amazing. Like every one of them, when I speak to them, they're just so incredible. They're also very open. They're not like, they don't have egos as big as a mountain. So basically when they come into a space together, they will be as amazed as I am by the other brains in the room, and they'll start to exchange ideas. And this is absolutely crucial for this kind of space to grow. And it turns out that we have found that music is our social glue that attracts all of these unbelievable people to come in a space of what I say common understanding, because ultimately for me it's always about communication. Music is a way to communicate in ways that you can't do otherwise. Other ways that our community also communicates between themselves is by prototyping and making new instruments and creating with their hands and not just writing or reading. So other kinds of communication. And it eliminates this problem with jargon, which all these different tribes otherwise develop. And out of this comes this complete new directions for music, for the music industry, and for all sorts of other activities in life, which is just fantastic to see. So, just to quote you an example, 2 weeks ago we were in Helsinki. It's a little bit of a contrast with here. And we were in Helsinki in Finland. And we were running a thing with what we call a smaller lab, because it was basically 30 people in a room. And out of those, there were scientists, there were artists, there was a blind singer who's trained at the Sibelius Institute, beautiful vocalist, who does both traditional and rock. She's also a vocal coach. She was at the center of our stage. Our neuroscientist team developed a neurofeedback interface to allow her to play music with her brain. This is not just science fiction, this is perfectly possible. Basically, it comes from clinical techniques when you have people with anxiety and you give them some kind of feedback on the screen to show when their brain condition is changing. They can recognize it and start to train to control their brain so they don't get the anxiety attack. Now, that same technique you can use to train the brain to go up and down the musical scale and hit some notes. For most of us here, it will take you at least 2 hours before you can do anything interesting. However, the blind singer put it on and she was playing without any training whatsoever. And everybody just went, what? And the neuroscientist guy said, I've never seen this before. This is amazing. Now, of course, you could say, oh, maybe because she doesn't have visual distraction. Maybe because she's also a trained vocalist. Maybe because she has been focusing on sound so much. Who knows? He needs to do some more trials to actually be able to write the paper. But it is very clear that not only is music here the driving force, but also the fact that someone who is normally by the rest of us considered to have a disability in today's framework, when it comes to brain-computer interfaces, she's far more able than some of the rest of us. So this is the sort of jaw-dropping moments. Not to speak of the beautiful performance that she executed in the end, when she used her voice to sing a song, a traditional Finnish song with the words from the traditional stories called the Kalevala, about the black heart. And she started with traditional beautiful melody, but then she started to distort it through interfaces we gave her, that she could actually give a signal with her voice and it would start to distort her voice. And then she was communicating with our cyborg. We have a resident cyborg with 3 implants, RFID chips in the heart and 2 in each of the wrists. And she was able to interact with other people on stage. Members from the audience had pulse meters and they were communicating to her their heartbeat, because she said otherwise she feels isolated. She doesn't know what the audience is doing, and then also with the brain. But musically it was beautiful to listen to.
So there's a whole bunch of things in there that I want to unpack. Okay, so one of the first things that you said in there, and I want to talk about the labs, because the labs is a really important development for Music Tech Fest, but You said the guys who do the neuroscience, the guys who perform music, the guys who do this, the guys.
They're all the band. They're all on stage.
They're not all guys. It's kind of one of the
say guys.
Guys. So one of the really important things that comes out is you look at these groups of people, and the gender split between them is not something you typically see either in the music sector or in the tech sector. So I'll talk about the labs in a second, but you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. We easily have 50% women in everything we do, and we could do a lab that's just women, both artists and technologists, and we have so many women actually blending their creativity together with some soldering and making up new kinds of objects, new kind of wearables to play music with, or new kinds of basically electronics that drive them, or write bits of code and things like that. And it's not there because we want to turn everybody into engineers. It's more because it enables them to express themselves in ways that they have imagined. And it just gives them new tools for expression. And it's really not hard because they're surrounded by lots of people who know this stuff, and then they all gang up together and they learn from each other, and it's really fantastic. We've just recently, last week just came in from London, and we were, one of our sort of, let's say, disciples was exhibiting. She has created, together with a neurofeedback guy, a hat that allows you to beam out light if you focus correctly. She's a fashion designer. She had never touched any electronics or any programming before. When she came to join one of our labs last year, she got so inspired. She said, how can I create more with these kinds of technologies? I have so many ideas. And basically I said to her, well, you do realize that she's like in Centro St. Martin's, or one of those really important colleges for fashion in London. She was doing her collection. And I said, you do realize there's no such thing as menswear tech yet? And you wonder why? Because it's perfectly possible to do it. So she went and created a collection, and now it's being exhibited, and it's amazing. She says it was a transformation. I can't replicate the words she uses, but it's basically been such an inspiring moment to unite to this community, to learn all this stuff, to be able to create completely new things, and to really stand out amongst the fashion collections.
Yeah, we get that a lot, incidentally, and it's nice to be able to take credit for that sort of thing, but it's not really us that does that kind of inspiration. We nudge. And it's about putting people in a room together who will inspire each other. And that's really what it comes down to, which is why I wanted to talk about the origin of the labs. So we started, you've heard that we're a festival, and you've heard that we have a hackathon. The lab thing, and of course the symposium is part of it, the academic stuff. The lab part of it grew out of and kind of evolved from the hackathon idea. But when you have I don't know, has anybody been to a hackathon before? A couple, yeah, a few. So basically what happens in a hackathon is you get a bunch of smart people together for 24 hours, you give them lots of Red Bull and pizza, and you say, invent something that will impress us, and they get up on the stage at the end of it and go, we made this thing. Aren't we clever? Let's all go to the pub. And that's the end of it. And we thought, well, there's magic in that, because if you put creativity at the center, which is what we do for everything, and you put different kinds of people together, artists and scientists, or people from different fields or different backgrounds or different experiences, then you start to get really kind of radical or disruptive innovation. How can we make that more focused? How can we get that to address bigger challenges, or how can we get that to develop further? And so the lab concept became about, well, let's put together a multi-day, in inverted commas, hackathon, but with more creative direction, more curation, and more of a kind of let's try and wrestle with this big problem in the world, or this kind of grand challenge, and then let's take what you make out of that and turn it not just into a performance that will showcase and present that, because we don't do the 3-minute pitch, we go to musical performance at the end of it from what gets developed at Music Tech Fest. But then how can we take those ideas and then give them life in the world? How can we seed them a little bit of microfinance, a little bit of incubation, so that the things that are really great ideas could become into a product? And through that kind of lab concept, we built that around...
Product being cultural product as well as being a
physical
app or being
a physical object. I mean, we had some things that were, you know, things that you can hold in your hands that you can either perform with or do things in the music space or the tech space.
You have people who hold patents, you know, you have people who have filed patents.
Well, I'm going to come to that in a second because
basically it's a full range of different things.
Yeah, but I want to come to that in a second because in parallel with the labs was music bricks. So, so from this Music Tech Fest community, and while this is going on, so we've done London a few times, we've done Berlin a couple of times, we've done Paris, Wellington in New Zealand, Boston, Slovenia, north of Sweden. We gather a crowd, and it's a kind of a there's a computer. Has anybody ever played a computer game called Katamari Damacy? Yeah, okay, right. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The ball rolls around and it picks up stuff and it gets bigger and bigger and it becomes the world. That's kind of what this feels like. And so everybody who works with Music Tech Fest is there because they went to a Music Tech Fest and never went home. And I'm kind of the poster child for that kind of thing. So
there's over 5,000 of us.
So we have 5,000 innovators kind of on our books worldwide who are in some way, in some field or in some fashion involved in Music Tech Fest. And so, kind of off the back of that, Mechela developed this concept of music bricks, which she wrote a proposal to the European Commission for funding, and you could pick up the story at that point.
Yeah, I managed to raise funding so that we could test drive the idea that all this valuable stuff that comes out of the festival actually needs supporting. And it needs encouraging, not to be just a one-off idea, but actually allow it to develop either into projects or prototypes or whatever it is that needs to be. And the other thing is that all these people we were working with, they're producing fantastic kind of new kinds of tools like microcomputers you can embed inside sort of things to become instruments or some data that you can, like music data that you can use to drive things. And basically, I figured that if you put new kinds of tools in front of people, they get even more inspired. So you put great brains and you put new tools and people get hugely inspired. And I called that music bricks, like the little toolkit that you get to kind of evolve new ideas with. And so we secured some funding to support people to first level prototype because that was the gap that I felt we needed to bridge in order to get to somewhere where then these people can get more funding. You know, once they have something that really works, you can go and present it to people. So if it's something that needs investment, you can get it to be invested in. Anyway, I thought, you know, it's a first off experiment. It's probably not going to work brilliantly, and we're going to fall over several times. So if we get one or two things out of it, great. We ended up with 11. We ended up with things going viral on social, like 5 million kind of impacts on social and stuff, which of course we didn't have a marketing budget or anything. So I had to go around and raise further funding to support this community because it was just basically going crazy, and a community then grew to over 5,000. It was about 4,000 before we started, and within like that year it just went up. And basically it was just an incredible process because we ended up with several being nominated for major awards, and then we have, as I say, one guy filed a patent, filed for a patent 4 months after the idea. Not prototype, after the idea. So like, he took 4 months to make the prototype and then filed the patent. And then we had the neurofeedback guys that are still now in our all our labs. They landed €1 million funding to develop their project further. So just that in itself was just kind of like a massive return that you would not normally get in all this kind of all the people who talk about startups. And
not to mention a whole bunch of awards.
Awards and before we get on to the awards, one guy who also worked with us is in Helsinki. He is MIT's 35 under 35 innovators. One guy is 30 under 30 entrepreneurs in Israel by Forbes magazine. I mean, it's completely insane. Like the number of guidelines I beamed over into the European Commission policy at high level because I ended up the last 3 years advising to the European Commission on the future of their innovation and policy. And now I advise to the G7 leaders as well on innovation. It is a bit insane, yeah, as you say, in the recognition for our field is probably more significant than the individual recognition.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about the labs in parallel with Music Bricks, because Music Bricks became this innovation methodology, and it puts, and it sounds like we're moving a little bit away from music when you start to talk about, products being startups and all these sorts of things. Music, I have to keep saying this, music is absolutely at the centre of this. It's what brings people together. Like we talked about, if we had an art tech fest, there's a whole lot of engineers would just say, it's not really my sort of thing. But as soon as you say music, I don't think I've ever met anybody that goes, yeah, I don't really like music. So whether or not you're in the music industry, or whether you make music or you perform with music, and what's astonishing to me is all these really kind of techie, sciencey people that you meet in this kind of line of work, whatever it is that we do, so many of them go, oh yeah, and I build guitar amps in my spare time, or I play in a band. We're not very good, but we absolutely love it, and we drink beer and play songs by Blur and Oasis. But everybody loves music, and that's what kind of brings people together. And so and what's great about music, apart from the fact that it is this kind of social glue, is that the thing that you do with music is play. You play music. And this playful kind of experimentation that happens at the center of these labs and these hackathons is absolutely crucial to the results that come out of it. And the reason I believe that we've had so much success with all these different projects with Music Bricks and these labs is because nobody went, well, there's this problem in the mobile phone industry that we need to solve. How can we make mobile phones better? Because all you will do, the best you can hope for is incremental improvement, is some sort of, now mobile phones are a bit better, isn't that cool? But if you put this sort of let's play at the center of any kind of innovation, you're going to get these radical disruptive things. And so one of the things, the guy who got the patent in Sweden, that's a really interesting story, because that ended up being something that was absolutely about music, and specifically music and gaming. And another industry came and went, that solves a problem for us, and it's a problem that we didn't even know we had.
I actually said to him, I said, how about we go over to these guys who manufacture huge machinery for cutting wood and
this
stuff
is
like that.
forestry and agriculture.
And saying basically we use this interface. It's a really, really cool interface. It basically allows you to communicate without using your hands and activate, but not with your voice. So if your voice is engaged, your hands are engaged in other work, you can still activate and add sort of communications and change menus and drive through menus and do all sorts of things without a camera, without a Kinect, without expensive equipment. It's just through, basically through a sensor that we developed and through the system that he's developed. But basically, I thought, well, hang on a second, this is really useful for a big industry, so why don't we go over there and have a chat with them? And they absolutely loved it. They said, well, this solves so many problems for us. It's basically like a new iPhone for us. So this is incredible, because you can be very free to experiment in this space. And then of course you would not believe just how much what we do here as creative people and as kind of really forward-thinking people, how much that can influence some sectors that are completely outside. So that's where the sort of the recognition, I suppose, when it came, it was as much for that as the influences of all other areas.
Absolutely. So it was around this time that a couple of things happened. One was Mechela went, okay, this is not just the music industry or the tech industry, this is all industry. And if we can put music technology at the center of innovation across all industry sectors, what that enables is for those sectors to break down. The silos, sort of the gaps between them cease to exist. You can put together something from medicine with the financial tech world, with self-driving cars, with agriculture, and you can get our music tech guys working on all these different types of technologies and building hybrid new ideas that put music and creativity at the center of it, and you can reinvent the world. I mean, it's as big as that, because all of these sectors operate completely individually, and they have their own marketplace and they have their own technologies. But when you start to see the connections between those things, you say the world can be different, which is sort of where I came in the first place, because if we're going to be redesigning the world, let's make it a nice one. And so I became really interested in that. But that evolved into something that I'm going to get Mechela to talk about, which is called the Industry Commons. And it's also the point at which the European Commission said, you know what, let's award Mechela European Woman Innovator of the Year, which is what happened in March this year.
March this year. I mean, I would just say that in this respect, I don't think of myself as a winner, but as someone who has been given the opportunity to represent our community, and particularly women in innovation and in creative industries and in programming and engineering and across, so basically women entrepreneurs, because that always requires huge amounts of support. I find it a great deal more diverse here in Brazil than I do in some places in Europe. Britain, in terms of particularly scientific and engineering quarters, it's awful. Some other parts of Europe are also very male-dominated, Italy, for instance. I was recently advising to the G7 in Turin, and I had a wonderful lady who is a data specialist for IBM have a really nice chat with me, and then I realized that she's there assisting the guys who are actually in charge. Even though she's just as qualified as they are, she's the assistant because she's female. So basically, I mean, I couldn't see any other reason. So basically, the diversity issue at the G7, for instance, I was full of admiration for the Canadians, because the Canadians turned up with their Minister for Innovation, who is Sikh, and who comes with his turban and says, I represent Canadian diversity, and with 5 women advisors, of which one was 19, and she had been an inventor since she was 12. So basically, this is the sort of thing that I want to see more of. So I feel a privilege to be able to represent women. There's apparently a following now in South America, as BBC South America published an article
BBC
about
World,
me.
South America, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't even know about this, and then I suddenly started getting all these messages from South America, particularly Chile and other places, and I'm not sure if it permeated Brazil. Might be that some of the South American countries tend to read more.
Also, it was in Spanish.
Well, it was in Spanish, that's why. Sorry, yeah, you're absolutely right, that's what it was. Because I was wondering, why is there no one from Brazil? But you're right, that's what it was. So basically, it was the Spanish-speaking countries in South America started to contact me, and there were women who are doing fantastic campaigns of uniting creativity and technology in South America, and there are also very, very entrepreneurial minds that got in touch with me. So I'm very, very happy to represent those. But also our entire community, which of course he's I call him Woman Innovator of the Year, actually, because he's as much responsible for it as I am. And also all the guys who are in our community are you know, he's a feminist, and everybody else, he's much bigger than me, so that's why he corrects me when I say guys. So basically, you know, this is a privilege, but one of the seminal moments was to be able to say this is the very first time that this award, and it's a substantial award, has been given to the creative industries. It was always medical innovation or engineering, space research or some such, that all the women innovators in previous years have been from those sectors. It's the very first time the creative industries have been given. And there's this wonderful quote from the BBC you were showing me, that someone had said, in old days, when your kids said, I want to be an artist, you would say to them, okay dear, but you know, you should really study like accountancy or law just to make sure you have something to live on. And BBC say that now, when your kid says, I want to be an accountant, they say, but you should really study the arts or some creative thing, because I don't think you're going to have much of a job out of accountancy anymore. So you know, things have really changed in this.
And particularly in the world of AI, which is obviously the reference for
artificial intelligence.
Accountancy and law, I feel like the first to go. When it comes to, you know, the robots taking over our jobs, that seems like the most logical place to start.
Anything bureaucratic, you know, you can automatize it. So.
But the industry commons.
Yeah, so the industry commons is this idea that we're just growing. Music industry obviously being at the heart of it, it's really, really interesting, because music industry works more than any other industry in the cloud space, with digital files, with digital promotion, with obviously everything's connected on the ground with live gigs, but all the tools are in this new space. So the music industry has been grappling with rights issues and how do you kind of split all the payments and all this sort of stuff for ages, whereas other industries are looking at it now. And so you can actually learn, and you can use music industry as a test ground. Then of course the creative industries latch onto the music industry very, very quickly, so all of the other ones, all the other kind of creative things. And then from there you can spread outwards into all kinds of other industries, and we have people from lighting come to us, people from self-driving cars come to us saying this is really interesting community and we could test drive some new ideas to do with how you manage data, how you manage intellectual property. And so basically what we ran 2 weeks ago is one of those, we launched Industry Commons by saying we will not just talk about it, we will build a blockchain system that will create intellectual property registration in real time while you create music, or you're creating technologies that are accompanying the process, anything like digital or in terms of creative authorship, we can log this in real time and see how we can follow the development of an idea, of a creative work, basically with a timestamp and hashed. So at the end we have what we call an intellectual property stack, like a sandwich of who has contributed what, and we have that logged in the system. And this is, if it's logged in the blockchain, is basically there's a stamp, and nobody can argue after saying, oh no, like famous stories historically of every band on the planet has had someone decided they were the author of everything, they were going to get all the royalties, and after the event, and then they start arguing who did what. And this is just, in the music industry it's normal. In other industries it happens whenever, very frequently, when large industry work with small players. So someone invents something really cool that's small but doesn't have enough lawyers to defend them, and then big guys come and clamp down. And we don't want any of that. We want people to feel in an open innovation space, the same as you do with open source code. If you agree on a set of rules and you log everybody, so that everybody can have attribution and everybody can have a slice of the pie if it becomes commercialized. We want to work in a way where everybody feels comfortable they own their slice. So we decided to actually try it and test it, and partnered with some blockchain specialist organizations, and looked at what it means to do it in real time while people are creating, and how we can create a system that might do that.
So the key to this ultimately is that we've got all of these different industry sectors coming together around music and technology. We're trialing, not just sort of talking or wringing our hands about blockchain and how is it going to solve everything for music, or what we're doing is experimentation. And that's really sort of key to all of these things, and how we get from a group of people in London sort of coming together and go, hey, you're as weird as I am, isn't that interesting, let's kind of do something together, to the point where you get somebody who's advising to the G7 world leaders on innovation and artificial intelligence around how the world can be different and better using technology.
But from the grassroots. So I'm not, I get my hands dirty. I actually develop, and I don't know if where Victoria was on here, I can see that there's a kind of just...
well, so I want to do two more things. The first thing I want to do is bring the kids into this now.
Victoria, by the way, do you know that Victoria was here at the opening of the Paralympics? She performed here. Victoria Modesta, who's basically a Lady Gaga of the accessibility world. She wears a prosthetic leg that does really cool. I don't know if some of you may have heard of her. So basically we did a whole lab around her, because when we realized that we were going to have more than 500 people making things in Berlin last year, then we needed an icon for this community, and it needed to be female, because as I say, normally in the music industry and in the technology industry we are usually the minority, and so I wanted to put a female at the forefront, someone who is not afraid to try out completely new very futuristic things, and someone who's a champion of accessibility, because for us the word normal doesn't exist really. And it's most interesting if you can turn someone who is considered to be, you know, to have some kind of accessibility issue, to actually turn them into someone we could all aspire to and want to be like them.
Well, so you've seen a whole bunch of slides go around again and again, and you've started to see these pictures repeat. There's one slide of was it the November issue last year of Wired magazine, which was guest curated by Barack Obama, where he kind of singled out as a sort of a future frontier for technology was the kind of the Music Tech Fest community with Victoria at the helm.
Victoria at the helm.
But so okay, so those were the labs, those are the industry commons. There's a lot of kind of moving parts to this, and I want to just bring the kids into it now, because quite early on we started doing, we were running hackathons already, and we thought, well, there are kids who are really into this stuff, and they're making amazing things, but also what it enables them to kind of imagine and envisage is a lot sort of further and greater than has previously been possible. And what that enables is quite exciting, and it's also, again, one of the reasons we're in Brazil.
So basically it's not just putting kind of accessibility champions at the forefront and making everybody just kind of want to be like that, but it's also getting every kid on the planet to want to be something in this space, and it seems to work beautifully. I mean, we started by running kids hackathons in London, basically the parents would come afterwards. All the kids would end up performing on stage with whatever it is that they invented. Some of them are tiny, like 6-year-olds, and they're so cute because they're so frightened, but then when they get this huge applause and they feel, oh, I've done something that's all right, you know, sort of thing. So basically the kids just get this sense of achievement, but then also get a passion for building with technology, and then the parents come to us and go, you know, I don't know how you did this, but, you know, my child was never into computing or anything like that. Now they want to be an engineer, so I'm not sure how this happened, but it's like really amazing. And basically, I was, the story with Brazil goes, last year I was sent by the European Commission to meet with Secretary Maximiliano Martinhal to talk about innovation and about joining forces in this whole area of Internet of Things between the Câmara Brasileira and the European industry. We had these really, really nice talks. But in that he told me the story about mobile telephones and how they lowered the taxes on the operators so that more mobile telephony could be distributed in all different places in Brazil. So between 2011 and then very short after that, you know, it went from 30 million mobile phones to 200 million. And this was obviously something that he was very proud of, and something that you know, I'm not going to go into Brazilian politics. Don't even get me started on that one. That's up for you guys to discuss, because we could be here for 3 days. Just on the point of enabling people with technology, that's the bit that I was interested in. And I said, okay, well, if you do want to make a generation of people IoT literate in a country that has apparently 10% illiteracy in the traditional sense, and I do call it traditional sense because, let's face it, the reading and writing part that we are also used to was enabled by the invention of the printing press, really. I mean, that's the thing that made it a mass communication tool, and we've evolved it beautifully, but there are so many others now. And if you have kids who are dyslexic or who have difficulty reading, we can actually introduce new forms of literacy, digital literacy, and literacy with sort of the Internet of Things components that are a bit like Lego bricks. And some kids are brilliant at putting together Lego bricks and they can't read, you know, so why not utilize that? And so I actually said, well, I think you need one smartboard per child. And he went, what would that mean? And so I kind of explained a little bit. I mean, it just came out with it because I just thought, this is what I can see. There was already the one computer per child sort of thing and one laptop per child campaign. It was a completely different thing because laptops are massively expensive. So there's always a price problem with that kind of campaign, whereas with a smart board, you know, you're talking about a microchip that's kind of this big, And you probably know about some of the campaigns that are running in the UK with children at school being given these and taught how to program and make things. And with our thing that combines music and building with micro boards, it's really effective. I mean, kids get to play in so many ways.
I think that's the key to it. It's because when we first started talking about kids hackathons, the first thing that popped into my head was these are basically going to be like little classrooms. We're going to teach them how to make something, and they can teach them how to do something. But it's so experimental and so creative and playful. Like for instance, when we did, because we split these things off. We do some kids things here and some lab things there. We did this thing in Italy, where what the kids were doing was using jelly, like edible jelly, to make a theremin and perform with it. And it was this idea
they ate it in the end.
and then they ate it. That's kind of fun. Right, but
they learned so much.
But B, yes, they learned a lot. But learning was the byproduct. It wasn't the purpose. The purpose of it was A, this is fun, and B, you're not just learning how to do something. You're making something that didn't exist in the world before, and now it does.
And you can communicate. You can express yourself differently with it. And when we had it was an employment. It's a massive employment fair that they run in Italy for young people who need to decide what they're going to be in life. And then I ended up getting mobbed because I had to do a speech about Music Tech Fest, and all these kids, it was a massive room full of kids. They all wanted to do Music Tech Fest for a living. Like, yeah, that was it.
There's no such job as Music Tech Fest.
It kind of is. I mean, there's a huge amount of people doing it. But back to Tech Secretary, Max, basically. Yeah. He was immediately clever enough to say, okay, go to BNDES and Brascom and immediately talk to some of these organizations that could actually help deploy this kind of thing, so that we kind of hook up to some of the organizations locally here in Brazil that not local, big organizations, but basically people who have in their interest to enable these kinds of things. And of course, we hooked up immediately also with our old friends. I can see some of them sitting up the top there.
So Painel we met very early on. In fact, I met, I think the first time we came to Brazil, and has kind of, in fact,
he's a major catalyst.
Actually, sorry, this is something, and you're going to take credit for this, Painel, is one of the things that you said to us when we came here to make the documentary about Furtado. We were talking about innovation and hacking and so on, and you said that's the missing piece of the puzzle. These Furtado guys, they're innovating in music and the rest of it, but they should be programming. They should be making things with technology. They should be pulling apart, things with wires and building new types of musical instruments. And
new types of systems
new
in
types
general,
of systems.
it doesn't have to be. Yeah.
Absolutely, and there was something, that's not a literal quote, but there's something in what you said that was about this kind of the social innovation, the technological innovation need to go hand in hand. And I think that's a really kind of inspiring opportunity there. So I want to go from the kids and the idea that there is this opportunity now to come and do something, this one smartboard per child, which is attached to the MTF labs, which is attached to the Music Tech Fest, which is, all these things are a big ecosystem of things that kind of connect to each other. But I wanted to bring it back around to the things that you've seen on the screen. The reason that we put these slides there is to kind of contextualize all of this talk about European Commission and innovation policy and smart boards and all the rest of it with people having fun. There are people jamming together and making music and performing in front of an audience and experimenting and talking and laughing, and because it all comes from and it all lives within a festival. And that's the thing that I keep having to remind, and this is one of the reasons I like having the slides, is this is kind of amazing. It's kind of fun and it's engaging. People who have never done this sort of thing before go, I can actually see myself doing that, can I have a turn or whatever it is. So we've put different things in different aspects of the festival, like for instance the jam camp. We set up a room with musical instruments in Berlin. Some of them just guitars from Gibson or keyboards from Korg or whatever, as well as a whole bunch of musical instruments that had been invented that weekend. and just said anybody who comes to the festival can walk into that room and pick up an instrument and jam and play with people whose records they bought 20 years ago if they want to. You know, there's sort of anybody can come into that space, whether they're booked on the stage or whether they're just sort of an audience member.
I was just talking to someone outside who's performing this evening as part of SIM, and they're sort of playing with punk. And basically, when you create new cultures, inevitably you get something like geek punk, which is basically being quick and dirty with technology and with modes of expression. And so people hacking into Wiimotes and the gaming controllers and a 3D printer on drums, and Lou Edmonds from Public Image Limited on a hacked guitar, which is half like Turkish and half some other ethnic guitar, and basically put them all on the stage of a London Symphony Orchestra at 8 o'clock at night in the middle of London, you know, on a Saturday night, and just hope for the best. And you think it's going to be a terrible cacophony, but the audience absolutely loves it, because it's just this immediacy of expression. It's bringing back this kind of idea that you can do anything, and you can use it to communicate with audiences in real time, rather than the post-production and the glazing over kind of the cracks and everything that the music industry traditionally, well, not traditionally, but in sort of more recent times has become.
So it raises the question of genre. We get asked from time to time, you know, what sort of music do you have at Music Tech Fest? Is it techno music? Is it, you know, is it this punk thing? Is it, you know, whatever? So just to sort of be clear, we've had everything from a string quartet to a punk band to incredible jazz performances. We've had obviously a lot of, we had a techno band where there were 5 members of the band and 4 of them were made out of Lego. Right. So we've had, you know, so we have a variety of stuff, and also we had somebody who basically ran into the audience, sat on people's laps and screamed at them.
Yeah, that was the Italian one, the Italian screaming woman. That was excellent.
That was
that's really, it's just really kind of anything goes, and it's really interesting in that sense.
But yeah, should we I was going to say, that seems like a good point, because this is basically, we've laid out all our cards. These are all the things that we seem to do and how they all kind of fit together. Does any of that make any sense first? Is probably, I mean, I've got more questions than you have, I think. But does anybody have any questions for us? And I guess we should probably use these.
So, has anybody got questions? Wow, everybody's processing. This is what happens. People usually say to us, I actually need to digest everything you just said to me, and I'll come back to you tomorrow.
Hi. I've been involved for a while in some very intuitive ways of making music into a specific way of creating kind of an entertainment, new type of entertainment where it's very interactive. And I have a question if somehow people from the entertainment industry that making some spectacles, new types of shows that they use the technology that you create. Does that happen already into like one show or many shows?
It happens a lot, actually. In fact, so last night, yesterday, God, we were...
Imogen was last night.
Yeah, that's right. So
Imogen Heap.
Okay, so
a few hours ago.
Yeah, so Imogen Heap is, if you haven't heard of her, she's an amazing recording artist from the UK. She works a lot with technology, but she also partners with really interesting people. And the example I was going to give was Alex Hoare's thing that he showcased at Music Tech Fest in London in 2014, which was this incredible light. It was a tree. It was this interactive, and as I think as you move towards it or as you interact with this tree, the lighting display would change radically. It was this really kind of beautiful, engaging, almost dance with the light. So there are lots of examples like that. We work a lot with projection mapping specialists, people who come up with new ways of doing visuals with performance. But I'm kind of interested in what specifically you're talking about.
It's many types of. It's just like a real lab, so it's not really defined yet. So it's exactly that type of interaction that we're talking about. But and it involves also narrative so that's really interesting, multimedia narrative.
Right, okay, so the first thing I would say is you're exactly the sort of person who should be turning up to a Music Tech Fest, not because you want to show up and say, here is the thing that I do, but because you'll meet 20 other people who go, oh my God, that's the missing piece of what I do. And so those kinds of collaborations, and just a word of warning, if that's what you do, what you'll find is what you end up making is nothing like what you thought you were going to make in the first place, but it will take you in interesting new directions in all sorts of ways. So that happens a lot. We had, in Berlin, we invited this incredible soul singer, Eska, who also happens to be a mathematician.
She was there last night.
She was there last night. So she's like absolute top of her game singer, and so we thought she's a mathematician and she's interested in technology and she sings, we should bring her along to this thing. She ended up working on a project in the hackathon, which we had no idea that she would even get involved in at all. Which involved
interactive tree, or
it was an interactive tree, which is why I thought of it. And the idea of it was to capture the light shining through the leaves of a tree as the branch moved to capture sound, and then turn that into a musical performance. And then that created a sort of a visual.
But it had piano keys mounted on it. It had piano keys that were tapping the tree.
It was more complicated than I'm making out. But she sang and improvised with it as well, and just the whole thing turned into this incredibly beautiful performance that could not have existed had those people not come together. So it's that sort of thing that kind of tends to happen a lot. So yes, it was the answer.
But she was also part of Vocal Tech Lab with a beatboxer, a bunch of Russian folk singers, and a whole bunch of other types of vocalists, and some visual mapping specialists and visualization specialists. So basically, what they did as a final performance was this amazing blending of voices. They were all, again, they were all loving singing with each other, because they would never normally have that opportunity, and it was just such a beautiful sort of, you would never put that together, but it was really beautiful. But then the visualization.
This is a really good example of the sort of things that happens. This is actually a demo from our hackathons that came out. So they made something in the hackathon, and in order to showcase it, they all had to come together in a performance like that. So.
Yeah, and we have, I mean, yeah, I don't know if that was a guy from...
Yes, just...
But there was the guy from Israel and the guy from Palestine together on stage as well, and things like that happen sort of regularly. But yeah, basically this is why, you know, when you have these kinds of completely crazy scenarios, like as I say, if you have a guy from Israel, a guy from Palestine who has brought a traditional instrument that's absolutely, again, beautiful and stunning, and then you combine that with the stuff that people have kind of digitized and whatever else, any ideas you might have had previously just kind of go, oh wait a minute, you know, this is just too exciting, so I'm just going to adapt it now to incorporate this because it's just too great. So this happens all the time. So yeah, I mean, you're very welcome to join us and to experiment in that space. Sorry.
It's always nice to get some feedback.
Hi. My name is Pedro. I'm a musician, artist, and also electronic engineer. And so I've always tried to get those two worlds together. It's very cool to actually meet you. And one thing that I always have in mind is trying to empower people with technology, empower these bands, say, hey, the technology is here. It has been here for quite a while. Why aren't we using it? And here, one reason is economy. Like we have, it's a real challenge. So when I put a video map in, I can't have the money for the projector or for different equipment and processors and working on that. So it's kind of a guerrilla approach I try to take here. Say, this is what I got. Let's make something cool with what we got. And I want to know if you're experiencing the music tech. Is that a concern? Or not as much because you have a different economic context?
No, not at all. No, gosh, no. We fight for every penny, and we raise cash. Like, you know, you always do in anything that you do that's kind of groundbreaking. It takes a lot of convincing to people to part with cash for it. But we managed to do that somehow. But it's always full of work. So don't ever think that we are kind of like bankrolled.
Well, I think that like the really key thing here is. And I think that what you're doing is the cutting edge. It's like, for instance, when technologies become cheaper and people start to be creative with them, to do the things that the expensive technology can do, but kind of hack it a bit. So, for instance, I have a son who lives in Leeds, and he's really interested in projection mapping. There's no way he can afford a projector; it's not going to happen. But he managed to find these very cheap lenses that are kind of, I don't know what they're called, thin lenses. He essentially used some very, very old technology, which is the what's the camera obscura in a box. With this, and it basically did projection mapping for the price of about 30 reals, and set up a system that way, and managed to discover new ways and new aesthetics and doing it. This is where hip hop comes from. It's people taking the cheap turntables and making new types of music out of it.
I always say, you know, if saxophones had been as cheap as that, you would have had quite different movements.
Well, again, this is where jazz comes from. What happened at the end of the Spanish Civil War was suddenly there were lots of marching band instruments, influx into New Orleans. They're all the cheapest thing you can possibly buy. New types of musical expression come out of, you know, what can we use, what's available, what's the cheapest thing we can get our hands on, just so we can express.
So, for instance, what we're finding is that our crowd is able to hack with stuff that's really very cheap, and achieve results that actually beat. So, for instance, that system that's been patented beats the Kinect any day on the same games, but it's like a fraction of the price because it doesn't require a camera tracking system. And it doesn't require Kinect or camera projection or screen. So basically, none of this kind of expensive bits of a kit, but actually it's driven by sensors and audio feedback. And we're finding that audio feedback as a signal, or as not just as a signal from music, but as something that signals to you kind of menus and activates things and whatever. Because we've now solved the problem with latency, as in there's no delay anymore, it's actually super efficient. And it's now really easy in terms of bandwidth to deal with, and it's also very easily portable, and it's embeddable, and it's really easy to fit into little chips and things like that. So lots of solutions are coming from that combination of things, which is super cheap.
We had a conversation, we had a meeting, we have meetings about innovation quite a lot, and there was one that we had in Sweden that something really interesting came out of it, because it was like 50 years ago there was this kind of unifying technological vision of how can we go to the moon? How can we send a person to the moon? And that can be our great endeavor, that can be our great thing. It's like, and then we've achieved that. And so the question was, what's the new one of those? What's the new moon landing for us? And people were talking about, Mars, let's send a person to Mars. And I was like, no, how can we all go to the moon? How can everybody do that? And that's where it starts to
at least feel like they've contributed to the mission. And
I'm talking metaphorically. I'm not talking literally.
Of course, but when people think of Elon Musk, when you start talking about this in that way. So the point is that, for instance, there was a hacker. Well, actually, one of the teams who are part of Music Tech Fest community are one of the 3 finalists in the Google X Prize for the kit that building kit that's being sent to the moon. I mean, it's at everybody's reach now. It's cheap stuff, really. It's about intelligence, imagination, and creativity. So the economic thing is not as much a factor, and this is, I think, why we see so many.
Well, it's the one smartboard per child thing can only possibly work if smartboards are less than $10 each, and they are, and now they're 5.
We can drive them down to that price now, and we can actually do it.
So I mean, the kind of, you go back to the moon landing, the computing power that's in a $5 microchip is 100 times the capacity of all the computer processing that went into taking somebody to the moon. And you can put that in every child's hand. So yeah, the price point is a really major issue. It's a really important one. And the cheaper the better, because the more ubiquitous the better. Because if everybody's making this stuff, you can get all sorts of great stuff.
So it's about what you said. It's about enabling especially every single kid nowadays, to actually have the power to reinvent themselves and everything else around them. And why not? And we're at that junction now, because we are going through if you ask me, major paradigm shift, because we're going into a space that I call the physical internet, which is, internet is now permeating everything. It's ubiquitous, like we call this.
There's a flip side to this too, because don't get me wrong, expensive tech is really cool. It's awesome. If you get your hands on some expensive tech, the most important thing is that you don't use it according to its manufacturer's instructions. You go, what else can this thing do? Then you start to mess with it, then you start, I mean, this is, okay, the Beatles in Abbey Road Studio did exactly that. What else can this thing do? And then you start to get things that are groundbreaking. If you use, I mean, this is the whole hacker mentality, is this idea of transgression. It's like, I know it's not supposed to do this, but let's see if it can. Or what else can this thing, what else can music be? How else can we do this? So yeah, if you get some expensive tech in your hands, you push it to its limits and find out what else it can do.
And let's face it, you know, if you're enabling kids, enabling young people, one of the best things you can teach them to do in this day and age, to be creative, to be innovative, and to know how to collaborate with each other. Because, you know, the old model of locking yourself into a bedroom and trying to fill with equipment yourself, or just reading a stack of books, it will take you way too long to accumulate the kind of knowledge and expertise that you can do in literally, we see this, you know, every time we run stuff, that the speed of it is amazing when you put a group of people together, you know. So this is what kids today need to learn how to be really good at, sort of collaborative work.
The other thing is, and particularly in the kind of thing that you do, I mean, you're all of these things in one person, which is rare, but not as rare as you might think, because we come across a lot of people who go, you know, well, I'm this in my day job, and then I'm a musician by night, and I want to try and find a way to bring those two worlds together, and this is obviously the place to do that, but there are lots of people who are one of those things, and I think when you bring those things together, we talked about this really early on with the hackathons. You need to have artists in the room. If people are making things for artists to play with, and artists aren't there to go, you know what, I wouldn't actually use it like that, but if you do this, then that would be so much cooler. Then you actually get things that are useful. And I think having those different kinds of knowledge in the same room, or even in the same person together, is really, really important.
I hope you'll join us, especially if we run one here.
When's the next one?
Well, the next one is actually, next one that's locked in the diary is next September in Stockholm.
That's a big one. There should be some labs in Belgium running, but then also, as I say, we're talking to people here about bringing one here at the time of Sim next year. So that would be just so cool, because I'd love to see a lot of you there. Question. Tanya, do you have something to tell us?
Okay. Absorbing.
Feel free to jump in. It's not, you know, it's open for conversation. Everybody's processing again.
I think probably the best thing for us to do is to just go and have conversations and go and have a drink and meet up with everybody. We don't have to fill up every single last minute. We've got 10 minutes left, but we can talk to people and...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, very happy to talk to anyone here who's really interested in this. And
we've never run out of time. I mean,
but this is and for Brazil, this is kind of really unusual. I think we should be sitting here for the whole afternoon, kind of chatting. But the thing is, I think that we pack a lot of information into a short time, so you kind of really have to digest it, because there's a lot going on there. So.
I wrote down, make sure that you talk about these things.
Oh, and he's writing a book about playlists.
Oh yeah, we can.
And
talk
if you're
about
interested
playlists.
in that, because that's like really, really cool.
Okay, here's a plug for my book, which I haven't finished writing yet.
Actually, you know what you can do? I have an idea. We have 10 minutes. You could read us. Why don't you read us?
No, I'm not going to do that.
Why don't you do that? It's so good. I mean, he just did that
12.
at Slush in House. Text 12 to text 12 with intro.
Okay.
You could just read some of your book, because it's really good.
Could, but I'm not going to. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about it. So I'll just give you a sort of a brief. In my spare time, he said laughingly, I'm writing a book. I've written a few books before, and mostly kind of in the academic space, about music and technology, about innovation, about these sorts of things, and radio particularly. But the thing that I'm writing at the moment is about how music makes meaning for people when you put it in an order. So mixtapes, playlists, radio stations, set lists for bands. You can. Who's played in a live band? Okay. So how long do you spend actually deciding in what order these songs should be performed? It's quite substantial, right? And there's a reason for that. It's important because people understand the narrative, the journey, the light, the shade, and all the rest of it. I became really fascinated with that. I used to program radio stations and choose which music gets played when, and how you think about that as a system, how you can program it. I also used to make cassette mixtapes for people and think a lot about, this is how old I am. Think a lot about, which record and how much, and even the gaps between. So I've got a chapter in this book about silence, because I think that's a really important part of sequencing music, is the gaps between the songs. And one of the first records I ever produced was a jazz record, and we recorded the album in essentially a day and a bit. And then we spent 2 days in the mastering studio going, and the next song. And no, that's not right, let's start again. And we actually spent more time on the silence than we spent on the recording of the music, which is really interesting. And then, of course, the first person I gave it to, here's our finished CD, because it was CDs. Here's our finished CD, and she put it into the CD player and pressed the shuffle button. And, of course, we're not married anymore. But not strictly because of that, but still, contributing factor. There are so many things. You start to talk about set lists and mixtapes and playlists. Not only do you get this kind of personal stories and people who have given these romantic mixtapes to people, or people who have made mixtapes for the occasion of their death, and these really kind of personal stories. I spoke to a doctor who helped people make mixtapes for, because they're dying. He was a palliative care specialist. And that process apparently is a really incredibly therapeutic thing to do. Right to people who, for a living, choose playlists for Spotify. And how that makes lots of money.
Didn't the people who make playlists to play at their own funeral? And they
Yes. I tell you what, if you make a playlist to play at your funeral, be kind to the people who have to attend the funeral. 5 songs is more than enough. Because if you say, look, you're going to sit through the next 40 songs, because these are the really important ones, no, everybody's going to walk out of your funeral. And, I know you're not there to enjoy it, but even so. So there's some fascinating characters and really interesting stories. So I can't sell you the book, I can't even show you the book. I've written about 1/3 of it, but I'm working on it. But the reason I talk about it, and the reason I say, hey, I'm writing this book, partly is to kind of make myself finish it, but and because there are lots of people who know about it now, and so they're expecting something, and I get this dreaded question all the time. So how's the book going?
Much like the documentary about the Furtado show.
Exactly.
Which actually, there's a wonderful anecdote, or several anecdotes.
Hang on, let me finish, before you come to that, let me finish this. The other main reason I tell people about it is that everyone's got a story. And those stories are really fascinating, and I want to hear them, and I want to incorporate those into the book. So if you have a story around mixtapes, playlists, set lists, CD track lists, compilation albums, radio station playlists, anywhere where music is put in order to create meaning for people, I want to have a conversation with you. So let's have a conversation about that a bit later on.
So one of the stories, I don't know if Ben, I'm allowed to talk about Claudio. That was such a great story. We interviewed lots of people for the Furtado documentary, including Tema as well, and Claudio Prado. And Claudio used to work with Gilberto Gil when he was Minister of Culture, and Claudio was very much responsible for introducing Linux into Brazilian businesses, and that's when Brazil became this kind of epitome of open source software. And at one point we were filming like every single day and traveling and lots of cities and things and interviews. And at some point Andrew said, should we have a holiday? Where would you like to go? This is Brazil, it's huge. So I said, Salvador da Bahia, because of course, that's where all the music comes from and I have to go there. So, okay, where are we going to stay? So I don't like staying in some stupid hotel that looks like any other hotel. So I just kind of went online and I looked at some nice couple I found that we could stay with that rented a room. And we turned up there and we get picked up by this guy called Marcos at the airport. It was very late at night and he said, so what are you here to do? And we were supposed to be having 3-day holiday, bear in mind, not filming and not interviewing people. And he says, we're doing a documentary about Brazilian independent music. And he goes, oh, my wife used to manage Gilberto Gil, and I designed covers for Caetano Veloso. And we're like, right. And he goes, and our next door neighbor, very good friend, is Paulinho from Nuevos Baianos.
And of course,
Would you like to interview him? He's like, shit, because this is like the album.
I do quite like that Novos Baianos record.
He's you know, and the seminal album by the Rolling Stone magazine. So we turn up, and of course next day is Paulinho and his mate from the band, and they're telling us all about the time of the dictatorship in the 70s and how they escaped with long hair into the European art circuit with the Rise of the Metorango Kid, the movie that was crazy, which was made by a bunch of people on acid, but a guy who smoked dope. No, the other way around. I can't remember.
No, that was correct.
The guy smoked dope.
Yeah.
And he looked like kind of a Monty Python on acid or something. And basically they went around the whole European circuit through like Locarno Film Festival, this festival. Then they crashed the Isle of Wight Festival with all these Brazilian artists.
30 Brazilian musicians.
That's right. And he said he went and talked to yeah, and they weren't scheduled at all. So he went in and with his, just played them the music and said, we want to play on this stage. And they went, okay, how many of you? 30. He said, you're kidding me, I get out of here. So basically he managed to kind of smuggle all these people. It was a legendary jam. He then hooked up with these people and said, so what are you doing next? And they were saying, this was a commercial,
Isle of Wight Festival.
Isle of Wight Festival, that's right. And basically, and he said, the first Glastonbury was a private affair.
Yeah,
so at this point, Claudio said he spoke to them about, they were all speaking about doing a free festival, and he said, okay, I'll get involved in that. And so this was the first open Glastonbury, and Claudio ended up being the one who built the second stage, because the pyramid stage was somewhere where everybody was just sitting and meditating and smoking dope and nobody could play. So they had to kind of build another stage for it. Anyway, the only reason we know all this, and Claudio never really speaks about it, or was because when we turned up at Marcus's place and talked to Paulinho, we were flicking through the footage that we already recorded, and he said, and he pointed at the person on screen and said, that's the guy who used to spike our drinks with LSD. And we were like, who's that? Okay, I'll let you put two and two together. I'm not gonna.
The really interesting thing about that is, okay, so we started the story like an hour and a half ago about us turning up in Brazil, being picked up in a black and dark car, and being told it's the revolution.
And living in a squat, 30 people.
Absolutely. So somebody who is a mentor to these guys, this guy Claudio Prado, who'd been very involved in the open software movement in Brazil, and had worked with Gilberto Gil in the culture ministry, turned out to be one of the guys who had essentially established the free festival movement in Britain that went on to become the monolithic Glastonbury Festival is today. And I went, I don't know what the story is anymore.
He went crazy to me. He said, what did you do? What did you? Because I actually got the info out of him, and he said, but I came here to do a documentary about independent musicians, and now we have this whole other story.
So this is the story of my life. Is I have this very simple idea about how the music can be used to make the world a better place, and then I present it to Mechela, and she makes it really, really complicated for me.
Interesting, not complicated. Interesting.
Yeah, and interesting. And so that's essentially kind of the genesis of Music Tech Fest and why we're in Brazil and why we want to do Music Tech Fest at this time, in this place, this time next year, which would be really fantastic to do in some form, shape or form. It'd be great. So this presentation has been sort of a Music Tech Fest flag in the ground for Brazil for next time around, and next time we will come back and it will be in some bigger form, and we don't know what that is yet, but we'll figure it out. So, thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.